Hi, I'm Tom Luna. I'm a former school board member. I was privileged to serve as senior advisor to U.S. Secretary of Education Rod Page. I also had the honor of serving for 8 years as Idaho State Superintendent of Public Instruction. During that time, I also served as president of the Council of Chief State School Officers. One thing I have learned in all these experiences is that educating children is not rocket science, it's more complicated. On my podcast, Swimming Upstream, we will visit with courageous leaders who challenge the prevailing tide and inspire all of us to swim against the current. Let's jump in. Welcome to another episode of Swimming Upstream with Tom Luna. And folks, we are here at the Excellence in Education Conference, where we have thousands of educators from across the country, not 48 states, that have come here and have been doing this for 14 years, but it's an opportunity to engage and learn from other states about the creative and innovative things that they're doing to help improve education across their state and across the country. And it really gives us an opportunity to learn from other state leaders. When I came to this conference as a state superintendent, I always left engaged and excited about something I'd learned, or really invigorated to go back and know that there were other people in this same fight, if you will, working hard every day to improve education and swimming upstream against those currents that oftentimes resist the kind of changes that need to happen in education. So we have another friend, another guest here. We have David Cooke from the state of Kentucky, who is here to visit with us. David's role is he's the Director of Innovative Learning in Kentucky. And Kentucky's doing some great things, some innovative things. They've got great leadership in Superintendent Jason Glass, Commissioner Jason Glass, and who comes with a great background, but has now come home to Kentucky to be the Commissioner of Education, appointed there in that position a little over a year ago or so, 2 years. So, but Dave, your role though, I mean, when we're talking about reforming education, modernizing it, whatever word you want to use, innovation is obviously a critical part of that work. So talk to us about the responsibilities that you have, and then we want to do a deep dive into some of those programs that Kentucky is using to address many of the challenges we face in education today.
Yeah, so about 12 years ago, we were just talking about a friend of yours who was my former boss. And he came to me and said, I was finishing up being the race to the top guy in Kentucky. Yeah. And he came to me and said, what do you want to do now? And I said, well, I have this thing where I think we need to really think about incubating innovation in the state. And he said exactly what I was thinking. So we're
talking about Terry Holliday. Yeah, great man, right. Great mentor to a lot of us.
So we set up this division at the Department of Education. And he went to work immediately on thinking about what are the things that needed to happen to make things better, not just for a few school systems, but all the school systems. Yeah. So he began with 10 years before the pandemic ever hit, we had the first remote learning program in the country, because he was tired of a lot of school districts in our eastern part of the state, particularly going through the winter and missing 30 days, 40 days of school because of snow and weather-related activity. So we created this program so folks could go to school when it snowed. And
so at home through the connectivity.
Through internet and so forth. So we were really prepared a little bit better, I think, than other states when the pandemic hit, because we had been preparing districts. It was a different obviously, situation, because it was full-time for every day. But we at least had and
it's not just the connectivity, right?
No.
Parents have to be comfortable with their children in that learning environment.
That's
Educators have to be comfortable teaching in that. Yep. So you were way ahead of the curve.
I think we were.
So then we had this abrupt...
We had done PD with teachers for a lot of years about what it took to really teach in this kind of environment. And everybody knows it wasn't ideal. Right. But we didn't have teachers going, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Right. When this happens. So... yeah, so that was probably our first big thing. And then we, like a lot of other states, we created an innovation zone. We called it districts of innovation. So a school district could apply to us to get flexibilities from some state statute and regulation so that they could try some new things. So that program began about 10 years ago as well, which is all of it, and as long as Dr. Holliday was with us, it just was getting us going and keeping us sustained on trying to figure out the best ways to make flexibility mean something to individual school districts, because they all had different things they needed and different reasons why they needed it. And we were trying to say, oh, well, let's change this policy in order to make that happen.
David, let's do this real quick.
Yeah.
Let's take a step back, because when people are listening to this, I want them to be able to make a connection that that just because it's Kentucky, in many cases, it's not a whole lot different than. So talk to us about just the demographics of Kentucky,
Yeah,
the regional
Yep.
population bases and stuff like that.
We have about 650,000 kids in our state.
So about twice the state of Idaho, just
Yep.
to put it in perspective for people in the West.
We have 171 school districts, which I think is a little high for a state our size, but a lot of tiny school districts, just like you had in Idaho and
Yeah.
other places. Very rural state. We have some of the poorest counties in the country when you look at the demographic data on low socioeconomic. We have only one urban center, which would be Louisville. Some suburban areas outside of that, but a lot of smaller communities that are doing this. So that's the best way to think about it.
So when you talk about one size doesn't fit all, obviously, you've just explained many of the reasons why.
Yep.
Very different from
Absolutely.
Louisville to.
Yeah, you can't take what you're doing in Louisville, which has obviously a very diverse population, and take it to Pikeville in eastern Kentucky and have the same conversations.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so let's go back then and then talk about some of the issues that all states are facing today, and maybe some of the innovative things that you're doing and have done in Kentucky. So, because of the pandemic and the abrupt closure of schools, recently NAEP results have shown that students all across the country have lost a lot of academic progress. Sure. In some cases, decades.
Yep.
We've known for 10 years that we were going to have a teacher shortage just because of an aging population. The pandemic just amplified that.
Right.
And now, I wouldn't say on top of that like it's a bad thing, but in addition, parents wanting empowerment. They want more transparency.
Yep.
And I wouldn't necessarily say more say, because I don't think it's just that alone.
Right.
It has a lot to do with transparency. So let's talk first about the learning loss that's happened and some of the things that your state is pursuing to address.
Yeah, so I would say the same thing. You know, Kentucky's no different than any other state coming out of this pandemic. That the NAEP scores amplified a problem. You know, I guess on one side of the coin, you could say, you know, there's an opportunity that the pandemic sort of forced front, because we knew we had score issues before the pandemic, and now
the pandemic in some cases just kind of exposed challenges and issues that have been there for a long time.
Right.
It's just we never had to deal with them.
Yep. But I think that so coming out of the pandemic, I think one of the things that Dr. Glass started us on as soon as he got here, and he came in the middle of the pandemic.
Right. That's right.
And I think that's the single greatest change that we've made as an agency around how we're supporting school districts during this process. And where that came, what he did was right off the bat, he went out and he did 15 listening tours virtually across the state. And he said, ask two questions of the people of the state of Kentucky. What was the system like for you? And what do you think it should look like for your kids, your grandkids, and the people of your community?
That's pretty revealing.
And he didn't just do that as an exercise. He then commissioned a report from 60 stakeholders of the state that were applied to be a part of this group, and wrote this report called the United We Learn Report, which has become our vision for education in Kentucky. And it states, this is what the people of Kentucky think we need in education system. That's done a lot of different things, but at the heart of it, Tom, that I think is one of the big things that we're figuring out moving out of the pandemic is, you mentioned it just a second ago, it said at the heart of it that communities need more ownership and buy-in, if you will, to the system. Right? So our systems in most states are top-down.
Right.
Accountability is federal and state. so forth and so on. What we found was, let us, the local community, take some ownership of this and give us some of reciprocally.
When people own something, they want it. They'll work night and day to make it successful, right? When they have a stake in the game.
So we this is back to this, no communities, two communities are alike, right? It's the same as no two kids are alike, no two communities are alike. So this thing has really driven us to say, what does that individual community think is valuable to them beyond the traditional things that the state's always going to measure anyway, your math scores and your reading scores.
Right.
How do we as the local community support that learning loss reduction? How do we, and if we own it, like you just said, if I feel like I've got an ownership in it, I feel more likely that I'm going to push to have it happen.
Yeah, make it successful.
Yeah.
So when your title, the Director of Innovative Learning, oftentimes innovation and the ideas that surround innovation, they bump up against accountability systems, or they bump up against funding formulas, they bump up against policy, maybe they bump up against federal or state regulation. So talk to us about how that just doesn't stifle or even suffocate innovation.
I think this process that I just described to you that we've just been through, so now we have about 18 communities across the state who are involved. We're calling them local laboratories of learning. And they're really pushing us on all the policy issues that come when you have these kinds of...
So work towards this and then let us know. Then we really do know this policy is a barrier or this funding formula doesn't work in this, rather than just trying to adjust the funding formula first.
Right.
Okay, that's great.
Then the other really, really smart thing about what Dr. Glass did with this listening tour thing and writing of this report is now when people like me go across the river to the legislature and they say, well, is that just something the Department of Ed wants us to do? We say, no, actually, hand them the report, and we say the people that, your people said this is what they want. Then it really allows us to push a little harder on, we need to make change in this policy or this legislation, and get those kinds of policies moving forward that allow, and it also at the federal level allows us to do that. We just were awarded a competitive grant for state assessment from the feds, and our application was the kind of byproduct of all this work we've been doing about what are we going to do differently about assessment and accountability. So we have some places that we can feel like we have support to make some change.
When you talk about assessments and accountability and this new grant that you just received, it really gives your state the opportunity to focus on those things that they've identified are important, and then figure out innovative ways to measure it, right? And I know your state is one that is focusing on what some states call a portrait of a graduate, right? What are those things that every student should know and be able to do? Talk about how you measure those things. I remember 20 years ago, the conversation about we want students that are critical thinkers, problem solvers, and good at communication, but it's always been difficult to measure that. So talk to us about making that connection.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about that conversation is it's really an interesting part of the accountability conversation, because when we've had our statewide conversations about the portrait, that's a big part of the conversation is, are we talking about something that we're going to put into accountability, or are we talking about something that maybe we're going to put in the graduation requirements, right? So it's just additional pieces beyond the grades and the test scores and those things.
Yeah, how do you navigate that, right?
Yeah, so I think that's...
Because the more and more, you're just adding more and more to the plate is one of the resistances we get.
Yep.
And sometimes rightfully so,
right,
from those at the ground level, right?
So I think that's where, and the other problem and the challenge that you face, Tom, is if you push it into that accountability conversation, then 2 years from now we're just going to be having this thing where everybody says, how do I game the system to make sure my kids, and what I'm going to make it, dumb down the assessment on those. But I think, to your question, I think you have to get to this place where you find some really creative ways, because everybody in those portraits, the same kind of things roll up. Collaboration, communication, those kind of skills that kids need, which are hard to measure.
Right.
But if teachers can see them and say, I'm seeing collaboration in this kid. It may not be that we can have a uniform assessment and that we give every kid, but we've got to be able to, and that's one of your points about how do we change the mindset of assessment not just being a test.
Yeah, or a hammer. Right, yeah.
Yeah, it's, oh, wow, look, I can demonstrate and show to you. I've written it down as the teacher. I saw Tom do this, and that tells me that he knows how to be a communicator and a collaborator and an engaged citizen and all those kind of things.
Wonderful. Talk to us about some of the other innovative things that you're working on through your office that other states can be.
We have a large scale initiative we just began with PBL Works, which used to be the Buck Institute, Bob Lenz, and we're trying to train over a third of our teachers over the next 2 years in project-based learning. That's a big one for us too. We used some of our ESSER funds to do a deeper learning grant for all of our districts where they're engaged in some activities there. One of the most interesting and creative ones that's only a small pilot right now, it's 7 districts, but a lot of districts and a lot of states have done micro-credentialing for teachers.
Yeah.
We're starting to do it with students. So we're thinking differently about how we credential student learning. And so we're engaged with them. We're taking Algebra 1 because we feel it's a gateway course. And we're saying, could we get more kids to stay in math if it wasn't this sort of, oh yeah, I got to do this credit and
one and done,
and I'm not good at it. So, and it's all about pass fail, right? It's all about I didn't pass Algebra 1, so I probably can't pass the others, and chunk that course down into much smaller units so that David can get section 1 of Algebra 1 and feel like he knows it, move on to section 2, and move on to section 3.
So kind of a mastery-based approach.
A mastery-based approach. So you've heard the term badging. So
sure, yeah.
So kids are collecting badges in this Algebra 1 pilot so that, and we really believe it's a national, there's several other states doing a similar thing. So that's a really new thing for us that I think is going to catch on, which is how do we think differently about how we credential kids' learning.
Wonderful. So is there a website or a web page that some listeners could go to learn more about this program and the other innovative things?
Yeah, we have.
I
would just go to the state's website, which is education.ky.gov, and right off the top, you're going to see our vision thing, which is United We Learn, which is the report that I described earlier, and it's pretty much the starting point for our website. And from there, you can go to my team's site, the Innovative Learning site, and see the different programs and how we do that. But there's a lot of information about this process that I described with the report and writing it with the people of the state on that first page. So.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being a guest. Sure. And I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. I didn't give you a warning, but I've asked some of the other guests, share with us one piece of information or fact about Kentucky that is unique that most people wouldn't know.
Our soil in Kentucky is the third best for making growing grapes.
Really?
After Florida and California, the soil content in Kentucky.
I thought you were just known for bourbon.
That's right, but we're trying to learn how to make wine. We're not that great at it yet, but
you have the soil to do it.
We have the soil to do it.
The third
and
best.
The decent climate. We got a climate a lot like New York. So, but yeah, we're pretty.
So say it again. The third best.
So everybody knows that Florida and California in the United States are probably the best places to grow grapes. The third one after that is us.
Interesting.
Yeah. So
fun fact about Kentucky. Folks, we've had the opportunity to have David Cooke here, who is the Director of Innovative Learning in the great state of Kentucky, to be our guest to talk about all the great innovative things they're doing in Kentucky. You can go to their department website and learn more about those things. And Dave, thanks for being a guest on our show. Thank you.
Great to see you, Tom.
All right. Folks, we'll be back with another episode of Swimming Upstream. Thank you for listening. And remember, our children may only be 22% of our population, but they represent 100% of our future. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to our YouTube channel and find us on your favorite podcast platform. Swimming Upstream is part of the Strategos Podcast Network. To view the entire lineup of our shows, visit our website, strategosgroup.com.